Welcome to Power Players by Origis, critical thinking to deliver the promise of clean energy. This program brings you leading voices in solar and energy storage and sectors impacting renewables, exploring challenges and solutions for industry growth, the true cost of operating and maintaining power plants, and system asset management considerations. My name is Josh Corbett. I welcome you to this episode hosted by Michael Eyman, Managing Director of Origis Services.
Well, welcome to another episode of Power Players. As everybody knows, we like to bring in the brightest minds in the industry and talk about things that really matter. And hopefully, those of you who are listening and watching can take home or back to your office, real useful data that we can use to change, our industry and change how power is produced and the solar industry and how we operate today. Today, along that line, for the second time on this show, I am happy to say I've got Leila Garcia da Fonseca here. You are responsible for the wind and solar operations and maintenance at WoodMac, right? And you run and head up all of the sort of reports and everything. And we're going to jump right into that report. But this isn't where you've always been. You've been at this for like 10 years or so. And Denmark, Brazil, Mexico, sort of all over the place, multilingual. Very aware of not just market dynamics here, but around the globe. Spent some time at Vestas, GE, you've been in marketing. I think you've got a master's in renewable energy, right? That's pretty impressive. I always respect education. It's, for me, that's one of those things that separates us, the willingness to constantly learn. And today, I'm hoping to learn from you. So, Leila, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me here again. It's a pleasure to be part of this podcast for the second time. And yes, a lot of places, a lot of languages, and hopefully we can learn from each other during this session.
That's always the hope, and maybe in the process, some other people learn from us. That's the deal.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So let's start in an area where you are absolutely the expert. The report you wrote and you helped put together that was released recently, and remind me when WoodMac released a report. Remind me the title, timing, when did it come out? Like, and sort of what's the focus? Like,
so
how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, so we have been publishing this report, I believe, since 2015. Since Wood Mackenzie was GTM and Wood Mackenzie acquired GTM.
Yeah.
And I've taken the role of kind of overseeing this report since 2019. And we publish this report on an annual basis, looking back into the previous year. So the report from 2023 looks back into 2022 numbers. We reach out to a number of major service providers globally, including Origis, and we try to get to understand how the solar PV capacity globally is being managed, also pricing, costs, and general market trends. So today we cover, I believe, more than 10 global markets, including the US and Canada and North America. And I'm happy to share the key findings and deep dive into our main takeaways.
So, since you're happy to share the key findings, what were the key findings?
Okay,
talk to me a little bit about the major takeaways. Like, just what did you guys pull from that this year?
I think I'm going to focus on two things that actually surprised me. So I mentioned that we've been publishing this report since 2015, and we have been seeing consolidation over the years, meaning that the top O&M providers, they concentrate a certain market share of the market, the assessed portfolio, because of course we don't cover the entire terawatt of solar PV capacity worldwide, right? Maybe this report covers 25% because it excludes China.
Yeah.
So considering that, let's say by the end of 2022, we had something around 800 gigawatts of solar PV capacity installed, excluding China. Our assessed portfolio comprises 207 gigawatts, I guess. So that's roughly 25%. And for the first time, we actually saw market fragmentation. And what does it mean? It means that the top 15 O&M players, they decreased their market share compared to the previous year. And that's kind of new to us because for many years, and you're going to remember that, we saw, especially in the US, we saw a lot of new big entities being formed, right? We saw, and if I forget one, Michael, please correct me. I believe we saw NovaSource through First Solar acquisition and SunPower, and even before that, the Also Energy Sun System O&M portion of the business. Then we saw Tachyon, which perhaps is more wind related for now. We saw Pierce Renewables, and then we saw Renewable, which includes Tonian, who is more focused on solar. And all of those, except for NovaSource, they are multi-technology, right? They cover storage, wind, and solar. And after those, let's say those four entities were formed, the M&A market was kind of, I wouldn't say quiet, but the transactions were not that significant in terms of volume in megawatts. And that kind of, I believe, our report reflects that. So we saw a lot of smaller players, players that are not within the top 15 global companies, increasing their portfolio, and also smaller companies, even companies that had maybe less than 500 megawatts under their managed capacity, really increasing more than maybe 3 times their capacity. So I believe that's kind of the first main takeaway / surprise we had when writing this report. The second one is pricing. As you know, we do a survey every year with the major O&M companies. This year, we covered more than 125 companies and had a record response of 35 companies responded to our survey, which gives us a lot of certainty on our results and outputs. And pricing actually came down, which is something that's surprise number 2. And it came down for globally, so for all regions, and we especially kind of emphasized US on the report. And you are also very much present in the US market. So I think we can talk and you can help me also understand why those prices are coming down, because we expect them to come up due to labor, due to wages and also inflation, right?
Sure. All right. So 2 things: consolidation,
yep,
or fragmentation. Why, what's going on, and pricing, right?
Yep.
So let's unpack these. Let's start with the consolidation fragmentation conversation, because I think that feeds into the pricing and some of the dynamics that are happening there. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw, at a detail level, when you were looking at fragmentation, consolidation, and sort of what's happening in the marketplace, new entrants. Like, just talk to me a little bit about what you saw there specifically.
So we actually, the top 3 service providers globally, not talking about the US only here, it's NovaSource, SolarRig, and Solve Energy. Mm-hmm. And they remain the same in 2022. Again, our report this year looks back into 2022. So I'm going to be talking about the last year. And together, I believe they represent between 20 and 25% of this assessed portfolio, which is a pretty a good concentration of the capacity. And then the top 15, which includes other companies that the listeners are more than welcome to download our report and check the full list, the full ranking. They went down to 55% of market share globally. And they were at 58% on the year before. So we see a 3% market contraction there, where other players outside of those top 15, those top 3, actually had a big growth. They added 17 gigawatts year over year, while the top 15 added 13 gigawatts. So for smaller companies, that's a pretty, let's say, big number for them, for sure.
Well, so, that's the report, that's the data from the report, but
Yep.
What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, so I think that as the fleet ages globally and components are going out of warranty, asset owners are trying to, can I find more competitive contracts out there for O&M? And then depending on the market, we see that a lot in Europe, for example. You have those smaller players that they are willing to perhaps not focus on very high profitable contracts. And they have the local labor, and they can make that happen for asset owners. So they go and they grab those contracts with older assets, and slowly they start to increase their capacity under management. So that's kind of my take.
So to be completely honest with you, I predicted this a couple of years ago, what you're talking about. And the dynamic that I saw at the time, and there is no one dynamic from my viewpoint in the marketplace that's driving this. There's a combination of factors from my perspective. And but what I saw happening was a lot of independent entities. Origis is no exception. You had, other groups like 8 Minute, which has now become Avantis, I think, and you had Invenergy, you had NextEra going out and competing in the third-party market, not just being purely themselves.
Yeah.
And so what I saw happening was a number of developers and owners, and a lot of the owners, people that we work with today, have an intention. I think of the 5 or 6 main third-party customers, we have 3 of them fully intend to develop their own O&M operations. So what I didn't see was additional third-party entrants. What I saw were entrants coming in who had a pipeline attached, had business attached, had an existing pipeline, and wanted to control their own fate. And didn't want to be, which makes sense, because so often what affects production, quality of sites and everything are determined by the contracts, the materials provided, the quality of the construction, the things that happen upstream, and are not actually determined by the O&M provider. So that puts third-party O&M providers at a real disadvantage, because they don't have the ability to work with the procurement team to work upstream to make sure that they have better quality equipment so that they can drive up time. They're just dealing with, they are completely isolated from those upstream decisions, which drive a lot of their effectiveness day to day, which then drive the perception of their effectiveness as partners. Right or wrong. And mostly
you guys
wrong,
are problem
to be
solvers,
honest.
I guess, because you get everything that could be done wrong in a way. You are there to fix it and make it perform the best way possible.
The metaphor I've used for many years is O&M is a big porch, and people keep lighting bags on fire, ringing the doorbell, and running away. and our porch is full of everybody's flaming bags of decisions and things that were made upstream, and we have to figure out what to do with it. And that's a real disadvantage for third-party players. So I think third-party players got a bit of a black eye. We've seen across the United States that the expectations on their production are unrealistic. The modeling is unrealistic, and yet there's this drive to try to get back to that, but you're trying to get back to something that wasn't true to begin with.
Yeah.
which is why you're seeing portfolios across the country. If you read kilowatt hour analytic reports and some of the others that are just not producing what they should. And so the net is a general feeling that people have of like, look, if this isn't being done well, why don't we just handle it for ourselves? And that's created a bunch of new entrants and who not only are serving their own needs, but are hanging their shingle out for third parties as well, which is, so that fragmentation has been happening for a few years now, but I think you see it coming to the forefront because what you're not seeing is growth in the third party side. So as a percentage of the total portfolio, when you have all these companies taking their pipelines off the market and driving them through their own entities, the available market for the third parties goes down, even when as a percentage and maybe in absolute terms.
And I echo everything you said, Michael, and that's our report actually doesn't include self-performers. And I mean, I oversee wind and solar, and those are very different markets. Sure. So while our survey here covers more than 200 gigawatts, and that's only 25% of the global installed capacity, because the market is fragmented, right? You have all those we call them self-performers, asset owners that they maintain their own assets, like NextEra. They are very well known for doing that across technologies, wind and solar. And now they are exploring, okay, if we do that well to our own assets, why don't we go and service other third-party assets? And we are going to start to see NextEra into our report moving forward because they are just starting. The capacity is still low, but they will eventually be ranked in our report. And it's not only NextEra; there are other few players that are going on the same way, and actually, I would like to add some things, but maybe we're going to cover that later on.
We're having a conversation and everybody else is along for the ride. So what do you think?
Okay, so because just after we released this publication, that we didn't see any like big consolidation or any big M&A transactions. Then, bam, the one big one came, which was RES acquired Ingeteam. And Ingeteam is
the service part of Ingeteam, right?
They didn't acquire the whole company.
Yeah.
No, not the whole company. As everyone knows, Ingeteam is an inverter manufacturer, and they had a pretty big O&M business division. They were ranked number 4 in our global ranking. And RES, who is a developer EPC, they also had their O&M division, and they just announced, it's still to be closed, but they just announced the purchase of the acquisition of Ingeteam O&M business. So yeah, just after the report came out, we heard about this. And that changes the market a little bit. Just like when NovaSource was formed, it's kind of a big, I wouldn't say disruptor, but it shows us, okay, so are we going to see consolidation coming back to the market? So it's exactly what you said. We maybe one year we see consolidation, the other year we are going to see a little bit more fragmentation. But bottom line is that usually the top 15 players globally, they are between 50 and 60% of the market share. That's what we've seen over the last several years.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that continue. It's interesting. I think there's consolidation happening in the third party. Only. But to your point, so many entities coming out and saying we're going to chart our own course, I think is driving fragmentation when you look at it holistically, and all the things you just talked about. But M&A, yeah, I mean, I think M&A is hard in this space. There's a number of reasons. One is because traditional M&A, the thought is, through scale, you can get savings, you can drive value, and you can scale up and then get a multiple value. It's a typical PE kind of driven mentality. And it doesn't really work that well for services companies because the margins are not that great, and we're going to talk about price erosion in a minute.
Mhm.
Margins are not that great, and you don't get as much from scale because the core of the business is labor heavy. It's 60 to 70% labor, and the labor scales on, the field labor, which is the largest portion of that, scales linearly with your megawatts. So it's not, you get some savings on the overhead, but you don't get savings on the bottom. And so that really makes it hard for your traditional M&A drivers, your VCs, your PEs, your investment vehicles to engage in that. And it also makes it hard to do an M&A where the cost of the M&A is supported by the value of the entity after the fact, because you lose so much value in the process. That, and also, to be completely honest, owners don't like you changing their counterparties without their permission. And they have a right to say, no, you're not going to do that. We're going to take our business elsewhere. We're not going to agree to assignment. We're not going to let you novate. I have had so many of those discussions over the years with the owners who basically just feel like, hey, we contracted with you. Now you're changing the game on us. We don't like it. And we're going
That's
to
a
take
risk
that,
for sure.
and we're going to take that control back in our own hands, which is again driving that third party thing. Like when you have all this consolidation and M&A happening, it creates chaos from an owner's perspective, which makes owners more and more say, let's control our own fate and our own future. What can we do about that? Right. And so I think these problems are sort of commingled in their root causes. And I think there's also a big chunk of it that has to do with what's happened since COVID and the supply chain issues, but we'll talk about that, I think, in a minute. So what other thoughts do you have around fragmentation versus consolidation based on what you've seen in the discussion today? Put your forward thinking view on what do you think next year's report is going to look like? What do you think? Where do you think this is going to go?
I think that after the rest in the team deal, I would expect more similar transactions to happen. And if let's say the team is an inverter manufacturer, right?
Sure.
So what are the other inverter manufacturers out there with some robust O&M business? It's SMA and it's Schneider Electric, right? So would those companies be willing to, okay, you know what, the O&M business give me margins that are way too low for me to make sense. So let's get rid of it. And because that's what was behind, according to us at WoodMac, behind the deal, Inge team wants to take advantage of IRA and all the benefits that local manufacturing will have across renewable technologies. They just announced on their Milwaukee's manufacturing plant that they are expanding that for electrical vehicles chargers, I guess. So to raise capital to increase manufacturing capacity in the US to serve this growing business of local content here, it makes a lot of sense for you to get rid of the no so profitable business and get this capital and invest in this manufacturing expansion, right? So I don't know, it can be this kind of business case can be replicated to other companies that are looking to expanding manufacturing capacity in the US. Other inverter companies, again, SMA, Schneider Electric, but then you have also other module companies, right, that could also be thinking about doing that. In the past, the creation of NovaSource was exactly companies kind of getting rid of their O&M businesses back then, right? So perhaps that's something that's happening again. So let's see. My guess is that we are going to see one or a couple more similar transactions happening over the, not next year, but over the next years. That's my guess. What's your guess, Michael?
Well, I think one, when you talk about the list of top providers, in the top four, you've got Solve, Pierce, and NovaSource, which are all PE owned, right?
Solve, SolarRig.
well, I said top four, so I left SolarRig out because I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
their ownership. Are they P? And they're international. They're not in the U.S., so I don't have an opinion there.
And you have Inga Team as fourth, and then Schneider Electric as fifth.
Yeah, but like Inga Team, as to your point, sold. But Pierce is in there in the top ones. I have to go back and look at the list. Traditionally, somewhere in there.
No, Pierce is, I think, number 20 something. So
Really,
they're lower.
they,
Yeah.
I didn't realize they had gone down that far.
Yeah.
So a lot of the top ones that are PE owned by definition are for sale and could be consolidated by a single party at a later date if somebody really wanted to. But that consolidation is more difficult than people imagine because, again, it's labor heavy, so the scale doesn't respond to consolidation like a software or technology company would. And the scale and profitability doesn't respond that way. So I think that, look, I think more and more owners are going to be, with big portfolios and big pipelines, are going to be taking it onto themselves. And I think consolidation in your developers and your owners is going to drive consolidation in the operations.
Yeah. Well said.
I don't think the O&M companies or asset management companies in and of themselves, I think the forces of consolidation there, which normally, for scale, profit, things like that, don't work that well there. And I think that the other parts of the market are going to drive that. It's going to be interesting to see. I also think there's going to have to be some rationalization around the valuations of those companies. PEs value those companies at anywhere from 4 to 6 times EBITDA. They're transacting 10 plus or minus 2. At which point in time you pay so much for it in the transaction that it's a 10-year payback based on the EBITDA multiplier and the EBITDA they actually produce, which makes it not pencil. So it's going to be, some of those things have to change. And to our next point about prices have to come back up for those companies to look both to be profitable and therefore look good from a traditional consolidation perspective.
I think you have a good point saying about the profitability and the valuation, but we also have to think that the buyer in this case, which is RES, they have other business arms, right? So while they go through the payback phase, they are also they can benefit from these other businesses, the development phase, the EPC, to kind of support this. So when we talk about O&Ms that are only O&Ms, it's very, very difficult for a buyer that's, okay, I'm an ISP, and I'm going to buy this portion of this third-party assets under management. It's very complicated. But then for a company that has other businesses, then things change a little bit. And another, before we jump into pricing, Michael, another thing that we have to take into consideration is that we are talking about multi-technology here. So the wind O&M business is very different from solar. You have much higher margins for wind. And actually, the wind O&M business today is much more profitable than new unit sales. So, and the Inga Team deal goes together. It's wind and solar and etc.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of moving parts there that make this deal kind of, it makes sense, and it can be replicated, I guess, in the future through other companies.
Yeah, and RES is historically mainly an EPC, right? Those entities and all those countries that Inga Team was in, which were largely Latin countries throughout Central and South America.
Yeah, there are a lot of
and North America too, but they were really heavy presence in the Spanish-speaking and Latin countries. Gives RES a footprint in those countries through which to go chase business for the upstream business, which then helps to protect that upstream business and hand it off to an internal party, which helps to protect warranty obligations, a bunch of other things. So I think there's a bunch of reasons beyond pure profitability, like a PE would look at something for them to look at that. The interesting thing being to think about that deal was probably not driven by profitability of the business. It was probably driven by synergistic effects across the entities and the ability to use that to get into additional markets where they saw growth for the resultant entity. So there's
Exactly.
more sort of forward-looking business reasons for those types of transactions. And I think those are the types of transactions that will occur. PEs getting into it from a put money in, scale it, take more money out perspective. I think that activity not only is going to decrease or almost stop, but I think the PEs that are already in the market are seeing that it's hard to exit those companies and make any money off of them based on what they've had to put into them.
Yeah. That's it's hard, but it's true. Yeah. I mean, we cover everything on the inside, so I invite all the listeners to take a look. It was a strategic move and a win-win to both companies, and I was
Yeah, for
interested
anybody
to talk
listening,
about.
if you want to reach out to either one of us and give us your viewpoint, or please do, and
Oh
we will
yeah,
incorporate those views, in another year when we talk about this probably again. So that's great. So we talked about profitability. Let's talk about pricing. What are you seeing
that's
in
the fun
pricing?
part. Yeah, so we have internally, we have a group at WoodMac that does all the forecasts for pricing, both on CapEx and OpEx side. And for solar PV, we cover different segments, different facility sizes. So we go from the residential kind of power plant to utility scale. And our forecast over the next 10 years for solar PV for the last 3 years, the three previous publications, we actually are seeing an increase in costs. And again, Michael, our forecast is cost, and what we publish on the report is price. So of course, one is related to the other, but our cost projections is that it's going to increase in the short term, medium term, and long term. Because of labor, inflation. So fuel, trucks, tools, spare parts, technicians, everything is impacted by this. So that was our forecast. That's what we've been hearing from our clients, from the respondents from the survey. And then when the numbers came in, we actually saw a decrease. And we were all very surprised. How can companies be still profitable with a 7.9? That was the average that we got, $7.9 per megawatt DC per year, all in, full wrap.
How did you calculate that?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting topic as well. Well, to try to compare apples to apples, we receive a lot of data points, and they are different from each other. Some of them consider 2 mowings a year. Some of them consider no washing at all of modules. Some consider 4 washings, because depending on the location of your plant. So we try to normalize all this. It's a very complex exercise. We do our best, and in the end, we do an average. So it's it's a national average, which I appreciate it does not cover the very specifics of each state. But it's a national average with 2 mowings a year, 2 module washings a year, basically. That's it. So we try to consider the same characteristics for different project sizes. Mm-hmm. And in 2021, we saw $10 per megawatt DC per year. And in 2022, we saw 7.9, and that's for a 100 megawatt utility scale project.
Is that an average of what you're seeing?
That's an average for projects.
Is that a distribution, normalized distribution? Is it a straight average?
It's an average considering the fleet that each of the respondents cover. So let's say that company A gives us a price, and they cover 30% of the market, compared to another company that covers 5% of the market. So we do a weighted average for those prices that come in. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So what areas of the pricing and the market did you see significant shifts, and what areas did you not? Because the average it mathematically covers up certain areas that may have specific changes.
Correct. Yeah. So when I say average, is the full wrap average, but the full wrap average, of course, we go through prices into categories. So we have the vegetation management, we have module cleaning, we have correctives, both DC and AC, and we have preventative as well. Where we saw most change, and I mean reduction, price reduction, was on the preventative maintenance portion. And that's on the DC part, right? And also the module cleaning, which was very random. So my takeaway from this is that maybe we've seen a lot of digital solutions coming in, right, with O&M suppliers.
Yeah.
So we are seeing a lot of aerothermography, even done by aircrafts instead of drones. We are seeing a lot of robots doing module cleaning, which is much more advanced than the vegetation management part. So I believe driven by COVID that you need all those kind of activities done remotely. Maybe there was a boom of investments by asset owners, by service providers that are now reflected into pricing. Because we had a 44% reduction year over year on preventative maintenance only. And that's almost half of the cost. So that's kind of my take from this price reduction. As you know, it's a very dynamic market as well. So I would not be surprised if next year we see those prices going back to 2021 levels around the $10, which is what our estimation shows according to our model.
So why?
Why, Michael?
Why? I'm left with why. Why is this happening?
Yeah, I mean, digital solutions is one of the reasons behind, according to what we could when we spoke to service providers. But you, as a service provider, you tell me your side of the story.
The hunter becomes the hunted here. I see how this is going. You're flipping the script on me. All right, I'm being asked a question. Totally fair, by the way. When I look at it, I see a number of things coming together. One, average, normal length of O&M contracts is 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. So contracts get sort of repriced and rationalized at the ending and the beginning of periods when they get recontracted. That's when scopes get adjusted. That's when, owners say, oh, I want to maybe look at some other options, do an RFP, whatever. So one, I think if you look at when the IRA events have occurred, there's a 5 to 7 year delay where, everybody's waiting for the IRA to happen.
Correct.
The extension, like back in 2013, 2014, and now, and they're holding off and things aren't getting financed. And then when it happens, like suddenly a whole bunch of stuff gets financed and it all accelerates and you get this sort of compression and rarefaction in the upstream deal flow that's feeding these O&M contracts. And then you have a delayed 5 to 7 year period where they're getting rationalized again. And I think that's one of the things that we've been going through in the last few years. Owners looking around saying, let me see what I can do here. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is, the blissful days of pre-COVID 2019, right? Once we hit COVID in 2020, deal flow stopped, right? 2021, still not a lot of deal flow. 2022, everybody's waiting for the IRA, right? And it's really just now that I see, and what I've seen out in the marketplace is this pent up demand and owners, some who've had partial plants that they couldn't get panels for years, finally getting them closed out. Some who've had plants and, that were past NTP or waiting on financing that suddenly are getting financed and are off to the races, or ones that got pushed to one side. I've even seen plants with just poles in the ground for years that they sell partially finished and go back and finish out later. And so I think that And what does that do to the marketplace? That creates a dearth of available projects to grow from. So you see a flattening in growth of the third-party providers. Why? Because where are the inputs to that market coming from? And those inputs have largely slowed down and now are picking up again. But your reports are rearward looking. Correct. So when there's less out there, then the companies that are there are fighting for it more, and the pricing comes down because that is the primary thing that comes out of that type of competitive marketplace. You're not as worried about profitability when you're worried about survival.
Keeping your business afloat. Correct.
Just keeping the business afloat and getting to that next big growth bump. Yeah. So I think the dynamics of the last few years created a rarefaction in the market, a rationalization of existing stuff, and it created a hyper-competitive marketplace because the inputs to the deal flow were not growing the pie, and so people were fighting over the pieces of pie that were left. And to your point, this was all within the context of a bunch of owners adding their own fuel to the fire and creating even more competition while taking more of their pipeline off the market, further concentrating and rarefying the available deals. And so that's what I see. The problem here is that obviously if these contracts are not profitable structurally, then what's going to happen is O&M players are going to fail.
And that's what we've been saying for a few years now, Michael.
Yes.
That those levels are not sustainable. So when we got to the $10, we were like, okay, the it's kind of stabilizing now. That's more, that makes more sense, the $10. But now we went back to 7.9. And I'm like, can you really cover, can you really maintain a power plant at $7.9 per megawatt per year?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe you can, but I don't think that's being done as it should. Considering all the moving parts, all the activities that a solar power plant needs to
That's
perform.
The other thing too. When you're in periods of financial strain, you kick the can on expenses that you can kick the can on. You push them down the road, right? The other thing I'll say is, you can maintain a complete plant at 7.9, but you can't maintain every plant at 7.9. Some take more than others. And what I've seen is about a third to half of that is in the ancillary services side, which is your mowing, your vegetation management, your panel washing. And what are the major drivers of that are your microclimates and your weather, which in North America in particular are heavily driven by the El Nino cycles and how the jet streams are funneling rains and weather. And so I think to really understand these trends, given the fact that a third to half of your expense is going to be driven by 4 and 5 year climatic weather cycles, being driven by water surface temperatures in the central Southern Pacific, as well as some of the central Atlantic stuff that's driving storms and things along the East Coast. And then you have, so much of the solar market, which was in California and deserts, is moving into sort of second tier regions, which have great solar resources, but also are exposed to more weather variability. So I think in order to understand these trends, we're going to have to look at them on cycles that go beyond the El Nino cycles. So you're going to have to look at them in 5 and 10 year increments to really understand what those trends are, because you're going to get years like this year where you have like 2022, where we had a national drought almost, right? Well, except in the West Coast where you had a ton of rain. So all the places where we're dry, where it's not normally dry, well, you don't get as much grass growing when it's dry. And the areas that you're traditionally washing panels a lot, you were just trying to keep the panels, above the water line out there this last year. So you don't need to wash panels when you're flooding the whole West Coast.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think, again, to compare apples to apples here considering different states, different plant ages as well, right? When you
Yeah.
are out of warranty, your prices are going to go up, right? Compared to new built power plants. So there are a lot of things that need to be considered whenever doing this kind of exercise. Although we do try to do that, our is kind of a global average showing overall that, prices went down, although we
Prices went down.
expected them to go up.
We'll see what happens next year. You know, what I would like to see, if I may make a request of you,
Of
you
course.
guys, is break the report out and the pricing. I mean, I know you have the sections, but I would like to understand the up and down trends for PMs, CMs, ancillary services as a separate entity, not as a consolidated number, because I think that will be very instructional as to what's going on.
Yeah, we do have, we do analyze that in a certain way, but I think we could be more detailed on how we show that, I mean, the consolidated numbers. But after we said it all, Michael, I think we agree on two things, right? One is that the last few years have been very different, if I may say.
Anomalous. Anomalous.
And that's kind of one of the reasons perhaps why we're seeing the numbers going kind of crazy almost, compared year over year. And the other thing that I believe we also agree on is that there is no way prices can keep going down. You have the prevailing wage. Is that how you? Yeah, the prevailing wage from IRA. You have inflation, you have labor wages going up, combined with the IRA requirement. We have spare parts being affected by inflation. I mean, how on earth
and reshoring of manufacturing facilities into areas of more cost as you get a political realignment happening globally? Yeah.
So I mean, this price reduction was a big surprise for me. If it happens again next year, it's going to be a even bigger surprise. I wouldn't expect that to happen, honestly.
Well, listen, call me up. I'll go through the data with you, and I'll help. Like translate as best I can. I'd love to be involved.
I'm going to invite the listeners too, so we all do as a big group and have some discussions around it.
Yeah. If I was going to warn owners and financiers about this, the one thing I would tell them is, if you focus on price alone, which by the way, most of them do, you are never going to stabilize your portfolio. You've got to focus on what the sites actually need and make sure that you're getting that.
But we sound like a broken record. We have been saying this to the industry like for the last 5 years.
I keep saying this, and it just gets ignored. It just gets ignored, and there's not even it's seemingly a desire to really even understand those dynamics, right? Yeah. And that unfortunately has put us in a position where the industry is not fulfilling the promises that we've made from a production cost perspective. Structurally, we're probably not able to, and that worries me, because I'm here for a reason. I want solar to grow. I want it to be a solid form of power, and to have those headwinds, which are self-made, is frustrating. So, but given the fact that I'm supposed to be interviewing you and not me, what's your final message to the industry and owners and stuff from your viewpoint out of all this? What would that be?
Yeah, I believe that, again, people are just tired of listening to me saying the same thing. Every conference I go, I say the same, and I will keep saying the same because I think it's important, and it's very much aligned with what you just mentioned, Michael, is that whenever people start to say, oh no, to maintain a power plant, it's between $3 and $4 per kilowatt, per megawatt. Really?
That's never been true, by the way.
3 or 4 include? But that's what we keep hearing. Like, I mean,
it's just not true.
It's not. But that's so one asset owner hears that from another one, and they are like, oh my God, if they can do it, I can do it too. So the 3, 4 it stays in their mind as the target number for them to get from service providers.
Yeah.
But ask yourself, what is included in this scope of supply? Are all the required tasks to properly maintain a power plant included in its price? I don't think so. Actually, I don't think, I'm sure they are not. So I believe we have to get rid of this metric, although we talk about of course, the cost per year, but we have to get rid of this metric and really think in a way that you are maintaining your power plant to perform the best possible, in the best possible way. And now you have all these digital tools. You have digital twins where you can really see what you can do. I mean, how much my plant can really produce in terms of kilowatt hour. So I think the mindset needs to be changed, and we need to talk more about the comprehensive maintenance of a power plant, and not just numbers as it was in the past, as it is until now. That's what I see, at least. When we do this survey, Michael, we ask service providers of what asset owners look like what is their number one priority when closing a deal. And that has been price since forever and still is price. And I understand the numbers they have to pencil out, but it needs to, the conversation needs to be more than that.
Yeah, to boil it down to colloquialism is, I would say, focus on quality and understanding your actual needs. Stop squeezing the turnips. There is no blood in there, people. There's none.
Yeah.
You're just hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Well, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
And you are a wealth of knowledge. Your dedication to this part of the industry and trying to get data and facts out of the chaos so that we can all make better decisions is admirable. And from the bottom of my heart and from the industry, thank you. You are a power player, you're a friend, and thank you very much for being a guest on Power Players.
Thank you, Michael. It was a pleasure, and looking forward to the third one.
Number 3 coming soon, y'all. So keep watching. All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Find summary thoughts on this topic and more insights into operating your clean energy assets at origisservices.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Power Players by Origis, critical thinking to deliver the clean energy promise.